Resident Evil 4 as a game evolved a ton over its development. The game we know and love had different story elements and was sent back to the drawing board several times. The earliest rendition even became Devil May Cry. It saddens me to think that the merchant wasn't even a flicker in Capcom's eyes in some of the earlier builds. Perhaps he was, but he was certainly one of my favorite characters. The iconic story of Leon navigating through the village, trekking through the halls of the castle, and ultimately finishing the fight on an island weren't set in stone. In fact, there's a lot of factors that led to this story. If we turn back the clock to the early 2000s, there were multiple builds presented of the game that were each different. There was one where it was focused in a castle, another one seemed more supernatural, and the last one that no one ever saw externally brought zombies back into the mix. So why am I bringing this up? Because there was one oversight that changed everything we know about Resident Evil as a series. The timeline of events changed because of it, and ultimately the games to follow were shaped as well. Now, a big factor in this change was that things could have progressed normally if this didn't occur. It wasn't that the concept wasn't working from a story perspective. Let's pop into our time machines for a second and roll back the clock. The year is 20XX. Wrong direction. In the 2002 version of Resident Evil 4, Leon finds himself exploring a castle that was supposedly owned by Oswald E. Spencer. Leon isn't alone in his endeavor, but his team is quickly wiped out by Albert Wesker's men as they introduce a new bioweapon to the scene. Wesker's forces perish as well in the process. This is what was coined as the Black Fog, although its name was never set in stone. This evolving, cloud-like entity with whipping tendrils will be a primary adversary for Leon as he powered through the castle, but ultimately all this was paused because of one oversight. The GameCube couldn't handle this creature due to its processing power. When games are designed, it's incredibly important to always keep in mind the end result of where the game will be played. Obviously, Capcom tested this extensively, but I can't imagine the frustration of having a project stalled simply because one element of it caused a hang-up. Game designers often use tons of different tricks to make games run smoothly, from cutting out objects that are in your field of view, to obscuring objects that are in the distance with fog or other effects. However, when you have a complex modeled 3D object that is constantly evolving, things get shaky. It'd be like booting up the Elder Scrolls Oblivion on an older PC, and walking into a field of grass. If your computer can't handle all those individual blades of grass blowing in the wind, your game comes to a standstill or crawls. This is why the Black Fog enemy was such a turning point. If the GameCube was able to process this enemy, the entire Resident Evil franchise would be different today. I imagine this creature went on to become Ouroboros in Resident Evil 5 once technology had advanced enough to execute a proper evolving animation sequence. But can you imagine if things worked out originally? Let's pretend for a second here. You're Leon S. Kennedy, navigating Oswald E. Spencer's castle while Ouroboros is antagonizing you. The story in the official Resident Evil 4 places the game in the year 2004. This means that the game now probably takes place a few years earlier, like in 2002. At the end of this past version of the game, I imagine Oswald E. Spencer would be killed. If it's his castle and you're there for him and his projects, he probably would make an appearance at some point. Otherwise, it'll be a wild goose chase of a game, and you may not accomplish much. This means that he is no longer killed by Wesker in 2006, after Resident Evil 4 is over. As per the flashbacks in Resident Evil 5, Wesker or Leon would probably ultimately do him in, unless he fell victim to a bioweapon. This also means that Ouroboros is introduced a game early as the Black Fog. If we played as Chris still in Resident Evil 5, and the game was different, Jill wouldn't have been lost with Wesker in 2006, since Oswald may have met his end in his castle. More so, she probably wouldn't appear in Resident Evil 4 to confront Oswald, because she would normally do that with Chris. When Resident Evil 5 would roll out, I imagine they wouldn't use the Black Fog again as a primary antagonist or any similar overarching foe. It would have been showcased in the previous game. It wouldn't have all the attributes of Ouroboros, but it isn't too far of a stretch to say that the Black Fog was given a second life as Ouroboros. In this timeline, Las Plagas never surfaced, unless it was introduced in a different way. Perhaps Resident Evil 5 would have been about the parasitic discovery, and the fourth would have been about stopping Ouroboros. In this scenario, it really makes you wonder how Wesker would have actually died. If we played as Chris still in Resident Evil 5, and the game was different, could Wesker's death been skipped altogether? Jill wouldn't have been lost with Wesker in 2006, since Oswald may have met his end in his castle. Thus, she wouldn't have fallen under Wesker's spell. The whole timeline we're familiar with could have been thrown into disarray if the GameCube was able to render the Black Fog's animation correctly. No Mr. Merchant, no Dr. Salvador, no nothing. My heart weeps. More so, if for some reason the Black Fog didn't work, but the next iteration did, then things would be changed too. The second iteration after the Black Fog involved more supernatural elements that would have changed the Resident Evil universe. With ghost-like enemies and possessed dolls, it certainly would have shifted the series in a different direction. We could have truly navigated over to Silent Hill territory. This ghost guy with a hook really could have changed the series in tons of ways. Leon frequently hallucinates throughout this version of the game. So, from a theory perspective, it would have been a lot of fun figuring out what was real and what was fiction. However, this version ran into similar problems because it was trying to accomplish too much, and wasn't feasible for the GameCube and production. Through these failed attempts, Resident Evil 4 eventually evolved into what it is today. These odd production halting factors all paved the way for one of the greatest horror experiences that I've played on the GameCube. Imagining the future differently because of one single hang-up is quite bizarre. It could have been the final nail in the Resident Evil coffin if the game flopped. It's a lot to wrap your head around. But now that I dumped that on all of you, I'd of course love to hear your thoughts. How do you personally think Resident Evil 4's future would have been affected if things worked out differently? I'm really curious to hear your potential timelines, so please share them in the comments below. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this reimagining of the Resident Evil series. I think you'll really enjoy my video on the Resident Evil 4 Parasite, and how scientifically accurate they are. Extensive research went into it with tons of different parasites and scientific reports, so give it a click. Thanks for watching, guys and gals, and until my next video, cheers.